Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the channel. Today, we have a brand new episode of Tier List Tuesdays. Last time, my friends, I ranked the Mario and Luigi game series together. If you haven't watched that episode yet, go back and watch it and see how I ranked the Mario and Luigi game series. Here are also some of the ranks that we had from the comments posted on the last episode. So this week, I'm going to be ranking Nintendo's handheld consoles. Now, this is going to be an interesting one because Nintendo have a lot of handheld consoles that had re-releases with different, updates for each handheld console. So the initial meat of the video is going to be me ranking the original handheld console as well as all the handheld consoles that came out for that handheld console in the years after, if that makes sense. So for example, the 3DS, we're going to be ranking it multiple times because there's more than just one 3DS. And the same is going to be done for every single handheld console. So down in the comment section below, you guys can let me know how you would rank Nintendo's handheld consoles, if you agree with my tier list or disagree, and let me know why. Also, leave your suggestions for what you want to see for next week's episode of Tier List Tuesdays, and make sure you drop a like on the video. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. But anyways, without further ado, let's jump straight into Nintendo's handheld console tier list video. The Game & Watch is a series of handheld games created by Nintendo back in 1980. The unit featured a single game as well as a watch, hence the name Game & Watch. The Game & Watch series also introduced horizontal and vertical Game & Watches as well as a widescreen one throughout the years. Some featured titles for Game & Watch are Donkey Kong Jr., Mario Cement Factory, Parachute, Super Mario Bros., and Mickey and Donald. As a little kid, I never owned an original Game & Watch. However, I did own one of those little slick Game Boy looking keychains that had Game & Watch games featured onto them, and they also doubled as alarms and clocks. So it was good to have for waking up to school every morning before cell phones and other smart technology existed. I thought they were clever and fun, and considering that Nintendo re-released the Game & Watch with updated hardware and more games to play than just a single game on each unit, I would totally recommend getting the new Game & Watch if you're into that kind of stuff or would like to re-experience or experience what a Game & Watch is. Honestly, I wouldn't personally go out and purchase the new Game & Watch because it never really grew onto me even when I was younger. However, I will rank it not so horribly. I'm gonna go ahead and give the Game & Watch and its siblings the meh spot. And I'm basing this off of the fact that I personally wouldn't go out of my way to purchase one. And as a little kid, I never really felt the need to own one of these. I really did think they were cool, but it's just something that is not really worth getting and experiencing, especially if you've played other Nintendo titles. There's a lot better Nintendo titles than the ones featured on Game & Watch. Now moving on to the Nintendo Game Boy. This was the original Game Boy released by Nintendo back in 1989, and the console is definitely older than most of us right now. The handheld had titles and classics such as Super Mario Land, Link's Awakening, Pokemon Yellow, Wario Land, and many, many more. I never owned an original Game Boy Pocket, or Game Boy Light. I also haven't experienced most of their games. However, I do have to give this handheld credit as the Game Boy helped establish the market for Nintendo's handheld gaming. I personally wouldn't recommend getting one of these today. If you really have an itch to play Game Boy games, I would recommend playing it on the Game Boy Color, the successor to the Nintendo Game Boy. Just because I never owned one of these things when I was a kid, and just because the Game Boy never played games in color, I can't possibly justify giving this anything higher than a good because of the fact that it was beyond my time. And have you ever held one of these things in person? They're huge. I'm gonna give the Game Boy Pocket and the Game Boy Light the meh spot, and I'm gonna be giving the Game Boy as well the meh spot. Now moving on, back in 1995, Nintendo was way ahead of the curve when it came to VR. It's interesting because a lot of people probably aren't aware that Nintendo had their own VR console. Nintendo released a gaming console known as the Virtual Boy back in 1995. Shortly after its release, Nintendo discontinued the Virtual Boy as it was received very poorly by the public. The Virtual Boy had 22 titles to its name, such as Bomberman, Mario's Tennis, and Wario Land. A lot of the critics were unimpressed and concerned whether it was safe or not. Nintendo did classify this as a handheld console, but rarely ever makes mention of it. I definitely would recommend getting one of these today, as it's very pricey and outdated. Unless you're into that kind of stuff and you collect these things, then by all means be my guest, but I would totally not get one of these, and I have to rate this as a why. Why would Nintendo release such a console just to obliterate it off the face of the earth? Not only did Nintendo discontinue this thing back in the day, but they also never make mention of it, nor have they improved on it. So therefore, it literally deserves nothing more than the why. Why did Nintendo do this? Why? These are questions we might never know. Now, as a young little boy at the age of 4 or 5 back in 1998, the Game Boy Color was the hot new thing on the streets. I was drawn more towards the Game Boy Color than I was the Game Boy because of its sleeker new design, as well as its ability to play games in color. The Game Boy Color had classics such as Link's Awakening DX, Pokemon Gold and Silver, Super Mario Bros. DX, Tetris DX, and many more. Compared to handhelds that came after, the design for this was a little bit big, and it lacked a backlit screen as well. I totally wouldn't recommend getting one of these today. However, the games that did come out on the Game Boy are worth checking out if you're into old classic Nintendo games. I'm going to have to rank the Nintendo Game Boy Color as a good. It played games in color because of that reason. So we'll give it a good spot. You know, the games on it were pretty decent, even though I haven't really experienced much Nintendo Game Boy action. Moving on to one of my favorite handhelds, the Nintendo Game Boy Advance. This was released back in 2001 and was truly the first Nintendo handheld, or any handheld that I've experienced on such a high level. Just like its predecessor, the Game Boy Advance functioned off of 2 AA batteries and lacked a backlit screen. The handheld featured titles such as Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, Dragon Ball Z Boost Fury, The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap, Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, and many more great titles. The Game Boy Advance also featured a new design which made it more comfortable to hold, as well as a wider screen, as well as the addition of an L and R button on the shoulders. I would totally recommend getting one of these bad boys today, as some people are selling the Game Boy Advance with a custom backlit screen so you can play all of your favorite classics on the best handheld that Nintendo has done in the GBA series, because of its comfort, as well as the game libraries that you could play, plus the fact that it has AA batteries. I mean, who doesn't have AA batteries? You buy a pack of those things, you can game for a year off of your Game Boy Advance. So therefore, I'm going to have to rank the Game Boy Advance as a GOAT. Truly one of Nintendo's goated systems. This here deserves nothing less than a GOAT. And if anybody says otherwise, they are completely fooling themselves. They've never actually played a Game Boy Advance game. They haven't compared what Game Boy Advance library has to other things out there. I mean, come on, you had a game like Metroid Fusion, one of the greatest games of all time, on this little bad boy. We also had the Game Boy Advance SP and the Game Boy Micro, which are essentially the same thing, but they're different versions of the original console, the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy SP comes in a sandwich-like format and ditches the AA battery method for a charging method, and it also has a backlit screen that you can light up. While the Game Boy Micro is a micro version of the Game Boy Advance, it lacks the ability to play Game Boy games, unlike the Game Boy Advance and the Advance SP, so you're limited to only playing GBA games on the Game Boy Micro, and it's such a small little handheld console that most people have a hard time getting comfortable playing on it. Honestly, this kind of hurts me to do, but we're gonna first of all, we're gonna rank the Game Boy Advance SP. It's a great console. I mean, anyone who says otherwise, they actually haven't held one of these things. I thought that the Game Boy Advance was more comfortable to hold and play, but the SP, because of the fact that you could charge it, because of the fact that it also had a backlit screen and a new design which folded, which was kind of cool when flip phones were in style. You know, I always wanted one of these, but I always preferred the Game Boy Advance, but I really always wanted a Game Boy Micro. And honestly, after owning one of these things, I did have to ask myself, why would Nintendo release this? If nobody likes it because it's a small little thing, it's more of just like a collector's item to have, you know, to be able to experience Game Boy Advance games on such a micro scale. And to me, that is the appeal of it. I love the Game Boy Micro more than all of the GBAs that have come out. I would choose the Game Boy Micro any day over the Advance or the Advance SP, but my logic, it just asks me why, because I know majority of people have complained about it. Whenever I show it off, people are always like, this is cool to have, but I wouldn't actually be able to play on it because it's so small. So you're gonna get a lot of cramps when you play it on a Game Boy Advance. Obviously, the bigger screen, the widerness, of the console. The handheld feels like you're holding a controller, so it's a way nicer experience to play on the Advance than it is the Micro, but the Micro is more beloved to me than the Advance or the SP, if that makes sense. So I'm just trying to be fair. Next up, we have the Nintendo DS, the original dual screen handheld that was released by Nintendo back in 2004. The Nintendo DS had titles on it such as Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, Animal Crossing Wild World, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks, and Phantom Hourglass, as well as many, many other cool titles. Just like the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo DS was updated a few more times. We had the Nintendo DS Lite, and then we had a new Nintendo DS known as the Nintendo DSi. We also had the Nintendo DSi XL that came out shortly after, therefore creating a family of 4 for the Nintendo DS series. If you wanted to experience DS games and GBA games, I would recommend getting the Nintendo DS Lite, as it's my current favorite of the bunch, because the Nintendo DSi and DSi XL only allow you to play DS games and don't allow for that backward compatibility just like the Nintendo DS does. So therefore, I'm going to have to rank the original Nintendo DS system as a good. The console was very big and thick, and at the same time it was very weak for a lot of people, and I know I'm not the only one that experiences this. The hinge would come off. It came off, and I had a DS that was just sticking, you know, in a weird way. The hinge was like off on one end, so the screen was peaking on one end, and then it would just sag on the other. I didn't like the design of it, and then after the Nintendo DS Lite came out, I was like, wow, this is a goated console. I mean, not only could you play GBA games on it as well, the console itself was just refined and slimmed down to such a way where it made video games really, really fun. Like, seeing my brothers grow up with the Nintendo DS Lite, I was really, really envious by wanting one, but I never ended up purchasing one because I had the original DS, so I wasn't in need for a DS Lite. However, I would have preferred the DS Lite. And then you have the Nintendo DSi, which I have to honestly ask myself, why? I mean, why? Why would Nintendo release the DSi, you know, when they were coming out with the 3DS anyways? It's not like it's a meh console, because it literally does everything that the DS does. However, it's just, why? And then the Nintendo DSi XL, you know what? I could definitely put this as a meh. Because honestly, if you had the Nintendo DS Lite, and let's say you wanted a bigger screen to experience your games on, the Nintendo DSi XL would probably be the strat. But if you weren't interested in that, you might as well just stick with the DS Lite, because you get the ability to play Game Boy Advance games. Not Game Boy games, but Game Boy Advance games. And the library for that is huge, so it's totally worth owning a DS Lite over a DSi, in my humble opinion. Now moving on to Nintendo 3DS. A lot of you guys are probably familiar with this one. This is Nintendo's successor to the DS, which allowed you to play most games in 3D. Had a wider top screen than the original Nintendo DS, and it allowed for expandable storage, so you were able to download your games directly from the Nintendo eShop onto your handheld. It featured titles on it such as Mario Kart 7, Kid Icarus Uprising, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask 3D, Pokemon X and Y, and many, many other awesome titles. It also featured 5 different models ranging from the Nintendo 2DS to the Nintendo 2DS XL. My favorite of the 6 models would definitely have to be the new Nintendo 3DS XL, because the screens were bigger, the design was far sleeker, and you can expand your storage even more than just 2 gigabytes, as well as the fact that it came with an additional C-stick in the corner of the right 3DS, which made gaming slightly more easier. Honestly, I would recommend getting any of the 3DSs except for the new Nintendo 3DS XL. In my humble opinion, that is the best one that ever had come out, after the original, of course. And then the other 4 are just like, why? Why did Nintendo do this? So I'm going to have to go ahead and rank the original Nintendo DS is a great console, because don't get me wrong, this pioneered gaming on handheld in a whole different way. Nintendo was like, we're coming up with 3D nowadays. And then after that, we got the new Nintendo 3DS Black. This one, in my humble opinion, is nothing but a GOAT. You know, I still have one of these, and it's on my desk every day. And every time I go back to gaming on 3DS, I always end up grabbing this one over all the other ones. Yeah, I do own all the other ones as well. And then you got the Nintendo 2DS XL. To me, this is just like, why did they make such a weird looking device? I remember buying one of these as well, but it's like you cannot put this in your pocket like the other DSs, and you can't even play video games in 3D. So what's the point of owning such a thing? You have the original Nintendo 3DS XL. I thought this was kind of like a meh console in comparison to the new 3DS XL that had come out. Because this one, like, the finish on it was a little weird and it lacked that C-stick, so it was just a bigger version of the Nintendo DS. We also have a foldable Nintendo 2DS XL. I also own one of these and I played on it, and again, I asked myself the question, what was the purpose? Why is it to have a 2DS that folds? Because we had this weird mushroom looking 3D or 2DSs that came out before it. I always, like I said, go back to the original Nintendo, the new Nintendo 3DS XL, because that is the best one to experience on. The last one of the 3DS family is going to be the new Nintendo 3DS. It's not the XL model, it's just the original sized model, and to me, I thought it was also a great console. Preferably, I would choose the XL one because you get a bigger screen, obviously. And it has a cooler finish, but these ones also come on in fun different designs, like of colors as well, designs, and the size is just perfect. So if you want to carry the 3DS with you in your pocket and you don't want to necessarily compromise all that pocket space because of the bigness of the new 3DS XL, you can just get the original size model and you'll have a lot more room in your pockets, but still have all of the features and functions of the new 3DS XL. Finally, we have the latest and greatest, the Nintendo Switch. This, of course, needs no introduction. Nintendo released the handheld back in 2017, and we've seen some legendary games ranging from Breath of the Wild to Super Mario Odyssey. The Switch, in my opinion, is indeed the best way to experience Nintendo handheld gaming. Unlike its predecessors, the Nintendo Switch isn't backwards compatible. However, the library on the Nintendo eShop offers a huge range of fun games. We also have the release of the Nintendo Switch Lite, which essentially is the complete handheld version of the Nintendo Switch. If you're looking for the best of the best, I would totally recommend Nintendo Switch. So I'm going to be ranking the Nintendo Switch as GOAT because it indeed is Nintendo's greatest handheld that they've ever released. It's the perfect hybrid of a handheld console and a docked console. And then we also have a Nintendo Switch Lite, which unfortunately I have to ask myself why. Why would Nintendo release a Nintendo Switch Lite when the Nintendo Switch serves the exact same purpose and more than the Nintendo Switch Lite does? Honestly, I would not recommend ever buying a Nintendo Switch Lite. Always opt for Nintendo Switch because you get the Joy-Cons, the detachable Joy-Cons, as well as the dock for just a small little price difference. So it's not worth the investment, honestly, just to end up getting one of the Nintendo Switches in the future. That's just my opinion. One is GOAT, one is why. I think I have this flipped upside down. Oops. And there you have it, guys. My tier list for all of Nintendo's handheld consoles. Let me know what your tier list looks like down in the comment section below, and what do you think of my tier list? I feel like I tried giving a case for every single one of these handhelds to justify my reasoning of putting it where I put it. But then again, you know, you guys are allowed to disagree with me because everyone has their own personal opinions on all of these things. So let me know down in the comment section below. I'd love to know. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to vote for what you would like to see for next week's episode of Tier List Tuesdays. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.